Fidel Castro embraced Soviet-style communism and defied the US during his nearly half-century rule in Cuba. Overcoming imprisonment, exile in Mexico, and a disastrous start to his rebellion, Castro triumphantly rode into Havana January 1959, becoming at 32 the youngest leader in Latin America. On his retirement 49 years later, royalty aside, Castro was the world's longest ruling head of government.
The imperialist enemy committed the mistake of underestimating us.
The bearded revolutionary survived a crippling US trade embargo and numerous assassination plots before ill health forced him to formally hand over power to his younger brother Raúl in 2008. Castro survived long enough to see Raúl Castro negotiate an historic opening with US President Barack Obama in December 2014, Washington and Havana announcing they would move to restore diplomatic ties after 53 years. Born in the 1920s, Castro grew up on a prosperous sugar plantation. He attended the University of Havana, where he found inspiration in Cuban independence hero José Martí. In 1959, Castro organized a rebel band that overthrew Cuban President Fulgencio Batista. Although the US was the first country to recognize Castro's leadership, within months, his radical economic reforms and harsh suppression of opposition unsettled Washington. The US began working to oust Castro by fair means and foul, cutting sugar purchases while the Central Intelligence Agency plotted to kill him. In September 1960, Castro and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev were all smiles at the UN. 1 month later, the US slapped Cuba with a trade embargo. In April 1961, Castro declared his revolution to be socialist. In a humiliating disaster for the US, Castro personally directed military operations against a band of CIA-trained Cuban exiles who tried to storm the island's south coast. Within 72 hours, Cuban forces beating back the Bay of Pigs invasion. The biggest crisis of the Cold War, 1962, when US President John F. Kennedy announced there were Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba and imposed a naval blockade of the island. A tense week of backroom diplomacy resolved the crisis, with Moscow pulling the missiles out and the US pledging not to invade Cuba.
Se marchan las armas estratégicas. Pero todas las demás armas.
The strategic arms are leaving, but the rest of the weapons will all remain in our country.
Castro nationalized industries, reformed education and health services, as well as founding a rigid one-party political system, with himself as the first secretary of the new Cuban Communist Party. Under Castro's repressive 5-decade rule, hundreds of thousands of Cubans fled the island, but many of the 11 million Cubans who remained on the island were fiercely loyal. As the end of the Cold War eased global tensions, many countries renewed relations with Cuba, the former atheist nation even re-establishing ties with the Vatican. In 2004, Castro's advancing age was highlighted after he seriously injured himself in a fall. In retirement, Castro voiced unwavering support as Raúl slowly but deliberately made sweeping changes to the Marxist system he had built. A divisive political figure until the end, Castro's towering political career defying efforts by 10 US presidents to oust him. Tracy Brown, Associated Press.